Hello, Diet Disruptors. How are you? I am Coach Deb, and I am thrilled to have with me. And actually, this is the first time that Sarah Ball and I are meeting. I've heard and listened to so many things about her, but we're so lucky to have her with us today. And the topic that we're actually going to talk about is menopause. So Sarah is, and I'm going to try and get this right, is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner with a background in functional medicine. And so we're going to talk about menopause. And what I'm going to ask Sarah for you to talk about first is really thinking about hormones and how, what's happening within our body as we're going through that menopausal transition, and maybe even touch upon stages too of the menopausal transition.
For sure. Let's get into the hormones. Let's get into the stages. There's a lot to talk about here.
I know there is.
To unpack. Absolutely. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is menopause? So it's this magical time in a woman's life where her ovaries decide to take a well-deserved break and stop producing eggs. But along with this change comes a whole host of hormonal shifts that can leave us feeling like we're on an absolute physical and emotional and mental roller coaster. So there are 4 different stages of menopause. So there's premenopause, and this starts when a woman enters her reproductive years defined by her very first menstrual cycle. And this ends with the first signs of menopause. So that's stage number 1. And then we have stage number 2, which is perimenopause, aka the menopause transition, which I know is fun for a lot of you ladies. And this is where estrogen levels begin to decline and fluctuate. And while the span and experience of this transition to menopause is really individual, it's going to be totally different than your sister, than your mother. There might be some similarities, but it's really bio-individual. Yeah. The average time spent in perimenopause is usually around about 4 years or so. And some women might notice symptoms like irregular heavy menstruation, hot flashes, disrupted sleep, night sweats, mood swings, weight gain, constipation, thyroid kind of going crazy. A lot of imbalances showing up and not really feeling like themselves. Yeah. And then we have this next phase, which is phase number 3, which is the actual event itself, menopause. And this represents the end stage of this natural transition transition from a woman's reproductive life. So these ovaries of ours, they stop producing eggs and a woman can no longer get pregnant naturally. So it's really marked by the total stop of the menstrual cycle for 12 months or more. And then we have the last stage, which is postmenopause. And this is where we start to see a really significant decrease in estrogen and progesterone. So those are our 2 primary sex hormones, and we see that decrease. And so those are the 4 stages. Now, I like to talk about, and I've shared this, I believe, on the podcast before. In Greek terms, what menopause means is menos stands for month or menses, and pause is change of life. So really reiterating how this is a shift. This is where we're really going from those reproductive years into our years of actually reclaiming our power. It's an incredibly powerful time for women, despite what we might think or what we might have heard. And it's a time and a unique journey to really go deeper into exploring yourself and where you want to go in your life.
And I think that's one thing that, there seems to be a sort of societal, I don't even know what it is. There's this negative, there's this negativity surrounding menopause, because I think it's the fact that, women feel that they, because they can no longer reproduce, that they're no longer viable members of society. But if you think about it, that has nothing to do with it. Most women spend a majority of their life postmenopausal, and they've got lots of years in order to be able to share things. I mean, if you think about, you almost think about I even think about now that I'm going through the menopause transition, I have a teenager, and I was a teenager when my mom went through the menopause transition. And I can remember points, and I was like, now I understand that, oh, that's why this happened to mom, or that's why that happened to mom. And it can be, it's sort of like, you're going through these transitions together. But it's at the same point in time, you also have the great things about being a grandmother or having that freedom. And a lot of times women sort of find that sexual freedom because they're no longer worried about getting pregnant. And so they find those freedoms. And I think it's more, we talk a lot about mindset because that's one of our 3 pillars. And when we think about mindset, it really is like shifting our mindset and thinking about all of the wonderful things that can sort of be a part of your life now that there are certain things that you don't necessarily have to worry about anymore. But let's talk a little bit more about those hormones, because hormone fluctuations are really what are the root cause of a lot of the symptoms that women are experiencing. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we might be able to help ourselves with, other aspects of things. So go ahead and talk about some of those hormones.
All right. So the hormones, number one is estrogen, and estrogen's like our queen bee. It is what before we're going through the menopause transition, it's basically what our ovaries are producing to make us feel womanly, right? They make us feel, they give us our curves and our breasts and just, all these womanly features, but they also support our brain and our energy levels and our reproductive health. Now, estrogen, it goes through a shift. And just like I said earlier, it's going to be declining, of course, as we age and as we go through menopause and as we're fully postmenopausal, it goes to its lowest level. But that doesn't mean a bad thing. Our bodies are so intelligent. They're so smart. They know exactly what they're doing. But at this stage in life, our moods can become more balanced because of that. Yeah. So kind of think about this, women who are on their period, that is typically during that time when you're on your period is a time for reproductive women where all their hormones have actually kind of flatlined. Yeah. So estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and many women actually feel their best, minus cramps and all that stuff, on their period. Yeah. And I know I have for many years. And it's because finally all my hormones are equivalent.
Yeah, they're equalized. Yeah.
And that's what happens when we are complete with menopause and we're in that postmenopausal phase. And so it's a good thing. It's a great thing. That means our memory and our mood and our bowel habits and our hormones can all be just in this really happy place. Yeah. Then we have progesterone. That's like our calming, wants everybody to get along hormone. And progesterone is just as important as estrogen. They all have their roles. And progesterone plays a really key role in your brain health. It plays a key role in your moods. And when that's off, then we can feel really weepy and emotional and irritable and not like ourselves. That's where we kind of have that. I know you said a little bit earlier, Deb, where we can kind of feel like we're raging and not like ourselves.
And like constantly on edge because that's what you feel like. It's sort of even when you think about, like, I think about, teenagers, or when you're a teenager and going through that and teenagers just fly off the handle. Well, unfortunately, every so often it's like, you can hold it in so far and then you get to that breaking point. You're like, but you feel like a crazy person sometimes.
Exactly. And, we're in reproductive years, estrogen and progesterone can go in really high levels. It can go in really low levels. And that can happen while you're also going through the menopausal transition. So some of these estrogen dominant symptoms can show up, like constipation, like thyroid-based issues, and feeling anxiety. On the other hand, it's really interesting when estrogen's really low, we can actually get the same exact symptoms. So when a hormone is too high or too low, it causes issues. So we want everything like Goldilocks. We want it to be just right. Then we have testosterone, and that is a beautiful hormone that supports our motivation, our strength, our drive as females as well. And when we have that healthy amount of that, we're going to feel like we have zest for life, and we're going to want to, do those workouts. We're going to have that boost of energy. And when that's low, we're going to feel like we just, kind of apathy. We don't want to do things. We want to stay at home. We kind of want to watch TV and Netflix and not take a walk or not go do some strength training or do things for yourself. And in that menopausal transition, this can also wax and wane. And typically postmenopausal, everything is going to go on that lower end. But here's the deal, though, something I do want to mention. This is so important, and it's not really talked about a lot. When you are in your reproductive years, so before menopause, all of our hormones are mainly produced in our ovaries. They can also be produced in our fat cells as well, but mainly our ovaries. Menopause and postmenopause,
Mhm.
your sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, they are all being produced in your adrenal glands. So those are those tiny little walnut structures in your mid back. They are
Mhm.
tiny but mighty. And
Yep.
your adrenals are what supports basically all of your hormone functioning at that point. So it's really important to love on them.
Yeah. Yeah. And what are some ways that people can love on their adrenals?
Yes, I love talking about this. So with adrenal health, step one is going to be giving your adrenals the raw materials that they need to function. So we just want to give it the actual nourishment to function, but then to go beyond that and to thrive. So we
Mm-hmm.
need to, number one, to do that, we have to create safety in the body. And there's a multitude of different ways to do that. I know you guys talk a ton about that
Yes.
at Disruptive Nutrition with blood sugar balancing and food and
Yep.
mindset. There's another way too is, really focusing on minerals and nutrients.
Mm.
And I believe that we are programmed to heal and we just need to give the body the minerals it needs to do that.
Yeah.
And three really important vitamins and minerals that our adrenals need is number one, vitamin C.
Mm-hmm.
And this is so key because 95% of it is stored in your adrenal glands.
Okay.
So some really good food sources, the vitamin C in are your citrus foods, oranges, grapefruits, cruciferous veggies like bok choy, cauliflower, broccoli. Strawberries are really great. I
Yeah.
talked about adrenal cocktails before. That's something great to add in. And then potassium, which is needed not only for your adrenals, but for thyroid conversion as well. And some really great food sources for this are avocados and bananas. And I'm a huge fan of coconut water. Infusing that into your everyday can be
Mm-hmm.
really helpful to get that electrolyte in. And then
Yep.
lastly, sodium. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I think sodium has one of the worst raps in the world.
It
We're
does.
told that it's bad.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And here's the deal though. I'm not talking your strip table salt. I am talking actual mineral salt, and some really good companies who have sourced this correctly are Celtic salt, Redmond's natural salt. They're loaded with minerals. And those are so key for adrenals. But then I want to add one more in there, especially because a lot of you ladies are probably struggling with hot flashes and night
Mm.
sweats and maybe even constipation, thyroid issues. Magnesium your adrenals need. So if you
Yep.
want relief from hot flashes, make sure you're getting magnesium into your diet. Also, getting it through either lotion or baths. There's a lot of different ways we can get magnesium, but
Yeah.
it's needed for 80% of our metabolism.
Yeah.
And so some really great food sources would be things like dark chocolate. I'm actually talking about chocolate.
I know.
Almonds, mixing them together,
Yep.
almonds and dark chocolate. I love that combo. Pumpkin seeds, Swiss chard, spinach. There's some really great ways to just look at food as medicine. I know you guys do that all the
Yeah.
time. So, how can we get that nourishment in
Well, and
first and
it's
foremost?
interesting that you mentioned that too, because like having sort of gone through this for probably like, I don't know, 3 years. When I have noticed that the cleaner I eat and the more well balanced my PFC meals are, the better off I actually end up feeling. So I make choices for myself. Everybody makes choices for themselves. I eat probably most of the things that you are mentioning there, like we always say that when we're eating PFC3, we just need to make sure that things are balanced. You can have anything. You just need to make sure that it's balanced. And we obviously want to do things in moderation, but making sure that you're getting those foods in there. And it's probably better to get it from whole food sources. I mean, obviously you can get it through supplements and things like that, but your whole food sources are going to be your best supply of that. So
Yeah, absolutely. That's where I always start. And then, if you need more, then go for it. Magnesium is one of those that most of us are going to be really low in,
yeah.
especially going through hormonal shifts where we're using up that magnesium. We're kind of burning through it. And
Yeah.
there's something else I also wanted to add here. And I think this is really important for adrenal health. Some of you might be like, I do this. I would try to avoid drinking coffee and caffeine on an empty stomach.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is using these substances, right? Caffeine and coffee on an empty stomach is almost like beating a dead horse. They trigger the
Mm,
stress response and they actually force our adrenals to produce more cortisol. So this might temporarily, from a temp standpoint, basically provide the body with more energy.
yes.
But so, right off the bat, we're like, oh, we feel good. We're ready to rock and roll. But it's really close to using like a credit card to make a purchase for energy. And then there's no money left in the bank to pay
Right.
for it. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So having those alternatives, right? So there's, of course, alternatives out there, dandelion root tea, chicory root tea, tulsi tea. But you can also, of course, add your lovely caffeine and coffee in, but make sure to have it with a meal. That's going to actually shift everything. And that's not going to put a lot of stress on the adrenal glands. So there's ways in which we can do that.
Yeah.
And another thing I want to mention is that caffeine and coffee can make estrogen levels fluctuate
Yep.
because estrogen gets metabolized through the liver, the same methylation pathway that actually caffeine
Mhm.
gets metabolized through the liver as well. So this can actually cause even estrogen dominant symptoms,
Mm.
which show up as mood swings and hot flashes too.
Yeah.
So making sure that we're doing this in a way that feels really good to us, having your coffee and caffeine with a meal. I'm definitely more of the mindset of what can we eat and do in abundance, just like
Yes.
you guys,
Yeah.
not taking stuff away. So how can we just make these small millimeter tweaks that make such a huge impact in our adrenal health?
Well, and that's what it is too. It's making those small changes in order to
Mhm.
sort of help your body to function in its optimal state. And if it means that you need to have your, eggs and avocado, egg whites and avocado toast with your coffee, then that's a better way of doing it. But let's talk a little bit about cortisol, because cortisol is one of those, I feel like cortisol gets a bad rap too, like salt and fat. And, cortisol gets
Absolutely.
a bad rap and it has a role. But unfortunately, as we age, and I think one of the things that, people sort of think that these are things that just happen to women. And I think it's important for us to understand that doesn't matter your gender, when you age, there are certain changes that naturally happen. People naturally become a little bit more insulin resistant. People naturally have
Mhm.
rises in cortisol levels. So those are things that happen just as part of the natural aging process. It's not necessarily just because of menopause, but it does seem to get
Mhm.
exacerbated through menopause. And I think one of the things that,
Mm.
people will notice is that when they're under stressful situations, that their hot flashes might be worse, or if they're going through a stressful time, that their night sweats might be worse. So what are some things that, people can do in order to kind of help with those cortisol levels? What are some things that you talk to people about?
Yeah. So cortisol, you're right. That shifts and changes as we
Yeah.
age too.
Yep.
And what I've noticed is just overall, and this is in men and women, is, as they get older, of course, there's more stressors on the system and cortisol can rise, but also it can decline depending on the time of the day.
Yep.
Right. So what I've seen a lot is cortisol rising for people at night where they kind of have this second wind, they have insomnia, they have sleep-based issues, they feel like kind of wired and tired, right?
Yep.
And so ways that we can support it in the evening when cortisol is high, and even if this is during the day too, if you feel more anxious or just kind of more wired,
Yeah.
then a great way to do this is to actually utilize nature's rhythms. I'm a huge fan of like, what do we have in front of us that doesn't
Mhm.
even cost any money?
Yeah.
And by what I mean by utilizing nature's rhythms is actually the light rhythms. So what I call sunlight therapy, and how you can support this in the evening, in the morning, and midday. I'll start in the morning actually here is to get sunlight within the first 30 minutes of waking. Allow your retina, allow your eyes to get that sunlight in and activate, tell your brain it's time to wake up and feel energized. And what that's actually going to do is raise your cortisol levels because a lot of people who are struggling with low energy in the morning actually do
Mhm.
have low cortisol. And cortisol, the cortisol awakening response is supposed to be pretty robust within
Yeah.
the first like 30 to 60 minutes after waking. It should peak in the morning and then slowly decline throughout the day and become the lowest at night because
Yep.
once it's low at night, then melatonin takes over the show, right?
Yeah.
And when we see something other than that, levels are usually on the low end when they should be high in the morning, or levels are high when they should be low at night, then we consider that to be diurnal rhythm disruption.
Okay.
And that can lead to so many different symptoms that just our body's clocks are off, right? And that can lead to hot flashes in itself. That's not even menopausal related.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in the morning, getting that sunlight in for the first 30 to 60 minutes, and it doesn't have to be after waking is what I mean, but it doesn't have to be very long. It could be just 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And if you live in a northern location, I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, but if you live more north and it's really chilly, you can stand at a window and let the sun come in and maybe eat your breakfast near a window. Really habit stack so it doesn't feel like something that you have to add, but you can just add into what you're already doing.
Yeah.
Maybe you're brushing your teeth and keeping, your eyes looking outside at the window too is a great solution. And then during the day, if you can get a midday sun break, usually around like 12 to 1 is a really great time, or 12 to 2. And again, this could be just maybe 10 to 15 minutes. And this is a nice break from your screens, from work, from, your daily tasks, whatever you might be doing. It's an ultradian break. So it's a way for you to just take a step, reset. That's going to help you be more productive, but it's also going to support your cortisol and melatonin levels. And then in the evening, utilize the sunset. That's if it's not gray and raining. You can go out there, look at the colors of the sky, bundle up with the winter coming up here. And that's going to help produce melatonin. It's going to tell the brain, hey, it's sleepy time. We're seeing the amber, the darker colors come out. And so melatonin's automatically going to rise. And by doing that day in and day out, I've had people just do this 1 week alone and that shift their sleep schedules and their energy levels that quickly. So trying that out, giving that a go can make such a huge shift in your cortisol and your melatonin levels and really help to balance them.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's really important too for people to be thinking about is the movement piece, right? Because there's a huge when you think about menopause itself and the decline of estrogen, there are actually things that we can do for ourselves through strength training and through movement in order to kind of help the body, kind of almost trick the body into thinking that it's still producing, some of the hormones that it used to produce naturally. And a lot of times women think that, okay, well, I'm going to get big and bulky if I strength train. Believe me, you're not going to get big and bulky. What's going to end up happening is you're going to get nice and lean, because we don't have the testosterone that men have in order to bulk up. And if you see somebody who's super, like a man who's super huge, there's probably also other things that are in play there.
Right.
But when we think about strength training, some of the things that we need to think about is, number one, strength training is going to help maintain your lean muscle mass. It's also going to help you to gain lean muscle mass. When you're gaining lean muscle mass, you actually have doorways, as I like to call them, like within your muscles. If you think of like little doorways or little receptors, and those receptors are helping you to kind of absorb the food that you're eating, and helps you to actually use that fuel more effectively than if you don't have lean muscle mass. The other thing is, and we talk about as you sort of go through that menopausal transition, that 5 years after menopause can be crucial for bone loss. And one of the things that women can actually do is they can reverse bone loss or prevent bone loss by happening through strength training. And I'm not talking about lifting 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 pound weights, but if that's where you are, that's where you start. But women who are lifting weights need to be able to lift heavier and slowly progress themselves so that they are able to lift heavier and heavier, because and that's positive stress that you're putting on the body. So when you're doing things like strength training, when you're doing things like cardio, you're putting positive stressors on the body, which has a completely different impact on the body than, say, your other stressors in life. And it's important because we want to make sure that we're maintaining our muscle mass. We want to make sure that we're maintaining our bone health. The other thing that strength training is really important for is joint mobility and also joint and ligament function. And when you think about it, a lot of people, as they think that, oh, I'm getting older, so therefore I just am supposed to be stiff. No, you're not actually supposed to be stiff, right? So when you think about some of the things that there's so many benefits that movement can have for us. It helps to increase our metabolism. It helps with insulin sensitivity. It helps with just reducing, for some people, it actually helps them to reduce their hot flashes and night sweats because it's helping to sort of keep the body in better balance, which is something that's really important. And it's not just the strength training piece. A lot of people think that like cardio is the king of everything. For women going through the menopausal transition, do you need some cardio? Most certainly. However, strength training is going to be like where you're going to get kind of the biggest bang for your buck. Just naturally, again, through the aging process, after the age of 30, we start to lose lean muscle mass. We lose 8% a decade. Like, we want to make sure that you are maintaining whatever muscle mass that you have. The other piece that's really important, I think, to think about is also the piece of stability, because when your joints are stable, when your muscles are stable, you're better able to prevent yourself from hurting yourself if you fall. Because if you have that, the ability of sort of stopping yourself, if you have a strong core, if you have those stabilizer muscles and you're able to turn those on, it helps to protect you overall. So there's so many benefits of that. Now, people will think about, okay, well, I can't strength train all the time or do these things. But you and I were talking about before, like, one of the things that I think women don't necessarily realize is that during menopause, we actually need to be more active. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to go out and run marathons. We need like those active recovery days where we're foam rolling or doing yoga or Pilates. So mixing up what you're doing and making sure that you're getting in strength training, that you're getting in some cardio, that you're getting in, other forms of active recovery in order to help you, because a lot of times this can too also help with some of the sleep issues that women have to deal with, the sleep disruptions. I know for me, like the sleep disruption, I do not do well without sleep. I really don't. I am not a nice person. And it's funny because like that was my biggest complaint to my OBGYN was, I can deal with the hot flashes. I can deal with the night sweats. I cannot deal with like being up and being awake for 3 hours. And literally it's just because your brain is, spinning or whatever. And it's important for us to be thinking about, how we can use strength training and cardio in order to help us kind of manage some of those things so that we can bring our body into better balance. And a lot of times that's helping to actually make up for some of the losses that we have in estrogen. Strength training most certainly helps with that. So it's important for us to make sure that we're doing those things. Let's talk a little bit about self-awareness, because I feel like this is a time in a woman's life when she needs to be probably more self-aware than any other time of life. I don't know. I feel like self-awareness is a huge piece of all of this. What are some things that you kind of think about when you think about, self-awareness as far as like behaviors and thoughts and feelings and things like that when you work with clients and stuff?
Oh, absolutely. Because there's a huge mindset behavior component, but then also emotional component too, right?
Yeah.
And how to navigate all of that. And so one thing, I'm a huge fan of emotions. That's actually what I've decided to do a lot of studying in and specialize in with minerals and how that impacts hormones. And so for women, going through the transition, for women who have gone through it and are postmenopausal, there's going to be a lot of emotions with it. And there's going to be frustration. There's going to be hopelessness. Helplessness is really common. Lack of control.
Yeah.
Low self-esteem, unworthy. These are all emotions that I have seen bubble up in women. And commonly they affect our digestive system. They affect our liver. They affect our hormone health and everything. And one way that we can really start to befriend these emotions and be with these emotions is to create a safe space in our lives. And maybe that's a space in our home. Maybe that's a space in our car.
Yep.
Maybe that's going to the beach if you live near the beach. Maybe that's going to a park or a forest, like whatever feels good for you, where you can express yourself.
Yeah.
And maybe that's with someone else. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be alone, but where you can fully let it out.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is if you have that anger, the frustration, the bitterness, resentment even towards this transition, shake it out,
Yeah.
shake your body. This resides in our body. And the more that we can just be aware of it, the
Yeah.
more we can listen to it.
Yep.
It's talking to you. Emotions are primal language of the body.
Yeah.
And if you're feeling that frustration, a great way to navigate that is shaking your body. That's just shaking your hands, shaking your arms, shaking your legs, maybe putting a song on where you're shaking it out.
Yeah.
And then maybe if you're feeling like maybe it's some more of that despair where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going through this transition, and maybe you're feeling grief.
Yeah.
And give yourself that space to let the tears come out.
Yeah.
And, I think we're told as a society, keep it together, push through, you're role model for so many people in your life. It could be your kids and your spouse and your family and your colleagues and coworkers. It could be so many different people that you're trying to put it together for.
Yeah.
But in reality, and this doesn't have to be in front of people, it could be, behind closed doors, of course, somewhere safe, let it flow. I'm a huge fan of feel it 100%, dial up that emotion 100%,
Yeah.
because that's when we're going to let it release out of our body, because that shifts our mindset too.
Yeah.
And teaches us how to really listen to our body and these cues that are showing up. So that's something I did want to bring up, is like that emotional piece.
Yeah.
But yeah, around the mindset too, is like really viewing this as a new chapter, a new beginning. This isn't your life's over.
No.
Because I even saw it with my mom. I see it with my, grandmother, where they're just like, oh, I've gone through menopause, life is over, and I'm retiring, and I'm just going to sit on the couch all day, right? Like I'm just going to kind of wilt away.
Yep.
The truth is, this is a whole new beginning. There's so many stories of people like starting new businesses and, doing their passion projects later in life,
Yeah.
right? Or midway through life.
Because
In
this
their
is the time that you have to do it. You don't have the responsibility of raising your kids anymore.
Yep.
They might still be in the house, but they don't need you the way that they needed you when they were little.
Yeah.
And even if you have, if you're older and you have grandchildren, like they're not, it's like they come and then they go. It's sort of the best of both worlds. But I think it's important what you say with like looking at passion projects, because it is true that a lot of women sort of think like, oh, this is it. Like, my usefulness is over. Your usefulness is just beginning. Like, if you think about it, the amount of time that you now have to kind of share your gifts with the world, now's the time to share them. I want to go back to that emotional piece for a minute, because I think that that's one of the really important things, to focus in on, is really thinking about, like, we talk about the cognitive triangle of how our beliefs and actions and feelings, or our behaviors, actions and feelings, are really all connected to each other. And a lot of times when we're feeling certain things, we act or behave in certain ways. And a lot of times we don't necessarily feel like we have control over what those behaviors are. You don't feel like you have control over your feelings half of the time. And I think part of that is, again, going back to that self-awareness piece of being aware of the fact that these things are going to happen. You are going to fly off the handle. You are going to yell at somebody because they, I don't know, looked at you the wrong way. Literally, it could be like that, little of a thing. But taking that moment and allowing yourself to kind of be like, okay, this is not really who I am. And I understand that what's happening are a whole bunch of transitions within my body. And the reason I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling is because of those, all of these changes that are happening. This is a snapshot in time, right? If we think about like how long this is within your life, that you're not going to spend that much time feeling this way. You will come out on the other end, feeling better and feeling good. And sort of, as you had said, like everything kind of starts to equalize and normalize out. But I think it's also a factor too of making sure that you're honoring yourself and your body and listening to your body. Our body talks to us all the time. And, one of the things that we talk about at Disruptive Nutrition is when we start to eat PFC3, you really become in tune with your hunger. Like you actually become to identify what is true hunger and what is just sort of like that emotional piece of eating that sometimes, you know, comes with lots of stages of life. I mean, let's be honest. But again, it's really listening to your body and respecting your body. And if you're having a day, I mean, there are days when I've gone to the gym and the trainer looked at me and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, I got about, on a scale of 1 to 10, you're going to get about a 2 out of me today, but I'm here and I'm going to do what I can. And that's the thing. It's the fact of continuing to show up and making sure that you are honoring that, but also then doing some of the things that, you know, of saying, you know, I maybe might not be able to do that, and saying no, and making sure, you know, and being okay with that. You know, knowing that there might be a day when you just need to sit on the couch and binge watch Netflix, right? But that shouldn't be, you know, the thing that we do all of the time, but we do sort of need to, you know, get that awareness. What are some final thoughts that you have about menopause as we kind of wrap up our podcast here?
Yeah, I just love this whole conversation on listening to our bodies. And that's really, you know, one of my final thoughts is our body holds so much wisdom. And symptoms are wise messengers. There's a reason behind each and every one of them. They don't pop up randomly at the end of the day. They could be because of the hormone fluctuations. They could be because we are suppressing grief and anger, frustration. They could be because we're not listening to something.
Yeah.
And that's how they're trying to get our attention. So to really fully be in tune with the body is one of the most powerful things we can do, and how we can truly reclaim our health and how we can feel empowered knowing that we are our own self-healer. You know, going into this transition, and whether you haven't started it and you're just listening to this, or you're going through it, or you're on the other end,
Yep.
doesn't matter. We always have the ability to listen to our bodies. And just because something is common does not mean it's normal.
Yeah.
Just because our mom, our sister, our grandmother, our best friend
Yep.
is telling you this is the way it should be, doesn't mean it has to be that way for you.
Correct.
And of course, there's going to be fluctuations and changes in your body,
Yes.
but you get to rewrite the story.
Yep.
You get to rewrite how you want this transition to be, and how you want to come out from it, and what that new chapter looks like in your life.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point that you make, that, you know, we sort of have these standards of like, well, this is what it's like to go through the menopause transition. And I think that people go through, you know, what are that a lot of that research is based off of years ago. And I think it's really important for women now to do their own research, to make sure that they're educating themselves, to make sure that they go in asking questions, that they're not afraid to speak their mind, that they, you know, ask their practitioners about it. And if you don't feel like you're getting the right answers, or if you don't feel like you're getting answers that you think are correct, like, going to another source and being like, you know what, this might be time to break up with my OBGYN because they're not giving me the information that I need. You want to make sure that you're finding people who are knowledgeable and aren't just sort of like, you know, reading off of a script or saying the same thing that they probably said to your mother or grandmother. There's so much more information that we know now about menopause, about the menopause transition. There are so many more studies that are actually being done now. And so it is so important for us, besides the self-awareness piece, besides, you know, many other things, is to make sure that we're educating ourselves and making sure that we are, you know, that we're knowledgeable and that we're asking questions, and that we're our own best advocate, because we're the only one who knows what's happening with us. And if we don't feel like something is normal, or like that we should have to, you know, grin and bear it kind of thing, then, you know, we need to find solutions to that, which I think is another important thing.
110%. Absolutely. You know, advocating for yourself is where it's at. And I know it's not easy either.
Yeah.
And, you know, it takes baby steps to get there. But the more and more you do that, it's going to lead you down the right path.
Yeah. Sarah, if people want to get in touch with you and find out more information about what you do and how you help people, how can they do that?
Sure thing. So you can find me at my website, which is www.hormonegoddess.com. Or you can find me, I'm very active on Instagram. It's at the Hormone Goddess. Or you can send me an email, which is hello@hormonegoddess.com. And I check that pretty frequently.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And just to give you a little teaser, Carrie, Sarah, and I are working on a little something for you guys. So be on the lookout for that. We're fleshing everything out right now, but it has to do with menopause. So be on the lookout for that.
Yeah.
I am so glad that we got to spend this time together. So thank you very much. I learned so much from listening to you. So I so appreciate you giving us your time. And we'll be back again at some point in time soon with another podcast. Take care, everybody. Bye.